Welcome to this Arnall-Culliford tutorial on the garter stitch short row heel. This tutorial is part of our Confident Knitting series, 12 projects to teach you 12 new techniques from the world's best knitting designers. Today's tutorial is going to show you how to work this garter stitch short row heel that I've used here on my Moorland sock pattern. This pattern is found in Confident Knitting and is knitted using Fab Funky Fibres self-striping sock yarn, and this is the feet firmly on the ground colourway. This tutorial is going to take you through starting to work on the heel, doing the wrap and turn that's used at the end of each row. I'll show you how to work shorter and shorter rows in the first half of the heel, so you're getting shorter and shorter, and then longer and longer rows in the second half of the heel. And then finally I'll show you how to return to working in the round to complete your sock. If you hover over the timeline on this video, you'll see that we've got chapters labelled up, so if you want to jump straight to a particular section of this video, it's really easy to do so. Short row heels are a really versatile heel construction because they're worked in the exact same way whether you're knitting from the cuff down or whether you've started at the toe and you're going up. They're done in the same way, so it's like you learn one heel construction, you can use it for two different situations, which is super handy. I'm all set up here ready to work my garter stitch short row heel. I've got some of my stitches around the top two needles here for the instep, and then I've got the remaining stitches on these bottom two needles ready to work the heel. And you'll notice that I've got more heel stitches than I have instep stitches, and that just ensures that we get a nice fit on the heel and it gives a deep enough instep depth for people. The other thing to note is that the start of the round is essentially here in the middle of the heel stitches, and that just ensures that the start of the round will be at the back of your heel, so if there is any slight wobbliness where you've joined in the round, it's going to be at the back of your sock rather than slap in the middle of the front. Having shown you what it looks like on the actual sample, I'm now going to demonstrate the process using a double knit yarn, and I've also switched over to Magic Loop. That's particularly handy for me here because all my instep stitches can just sit on the cable and be ignored, and they're not quite so distracting for you as the double pointed needles would have been. Our first task is going to be to knit across all but the very last of the heel stitches. Now, my Moorland sock design uses a contrast heel, so we're naturally using a separate length of yarn to knit the heel, but I'd highly recommend that even if you're working your heel in the same colour as the rest of your sock, that you do join in a separate length or another ball of the yarn to do the heel, because it just allows you to tidy up any little gap that might form at the corner there. That's quite a common issue, and so just helps keep everything looking really neat and nice at that point. So we're just going to knit across until we get to the last stitch. We've come to the last stitch of the heel, and we're now going to work our first wrap and turn. A wrap and turn is a way of closing the gap when you change direction when you're knitting, and they're particularly a handy method in garter stitch because you don't have to do anything with the wrap, you can just ignore it. It just forms part of the texture of the garter stitch fabric. So to do the wrap and turn, our yarn is currently at the back because we've been knitting. We're going to bring it to the front between the needle tips. We're now going to slip the next stitch from the left needle to the right needle. We're going to bring the yarn back to the rear of the work. We're going to return the stitch to the needle it started on, and you can see that we now have a green wrap sitting around the bottom of that unworked stitch. And now we're going to turn. So we've turned the work, ready to work the wrong side row, and in order to knit across the wrong side row we now just need to bring the yarn back between the needle tips, ready to knit. And you can see again clearly there the bottom of that stitch has been wrapped. So that's how to do a wrap and turn, and we're now going to knit all the way along this heel section until we come to the first heel stitch. We're not going to knit the very first heel stitch. We are back at the beginning of the heel stitches. This is the very first heel stitch, and our yarn is, again, it's at the rear of the work because we've been knitting, and so the wrap and turns worked in just the same way. Bring the yarn to the front of the work between the needle tips, slip the next stitch from the left needle to the right needle, take the yarn back to where it started, and then return the stitch to the needle it started on. Okay, and you can see again there's a wrap sitting now at the very base of that stitch. We then turn the work and we're now wanting to knit, and so the yarn just needs to come back between the needle tips, ready to knit the next row. That first heel stitch may get a little bit loose because obviously it's not anchored into anything, there's just the tail of the yarn. You can tighten it up later, so don't worry about that. Our next job is to knit along. Now that we've done the first and last heel stitches, we're now going to knit to the last unwrapped stitch, and that will be our pattern right through this section where the rows are getting shorter. We will knit along until the final unwrapped stitch, and we'll then be adding a wrap to that last unwrapped stitch. The final heel stitch has a wrap, as we can see at the bottom there, so this last green stitch is the last unwrapped stitch, and we're not going to knit it, we're going to do a wrap and turn again. To the front, slip, to the back, slip, and then turn, and bring the yarn back to the back, ready to knit. And we're going to do the same now. We're going to work along. This will be our last wrapped stitch, so we're going to stop before the one before it and add a wrap to the one before. So what you're going to end up with as you work along this section, the rows will get shorter and you'll end up with every stitch at the ends of the row that's not been worked. All of those stitches will have been wrapped. We've reached the last unwrapped stitch, so we're going to do a wrap and turn. In this section where the rows are getting shorter and shorter, really the only tricky thing is going to be spotting whether or not a stitch has been wrapped. So I'm going to work on a few more rows and show you hopefully nice and clearly what the wrap looks like in comparison with the garter stitch ridges. I've now worked on a few rows and I'm coming towards the end of this wrong side row, and I need to work out which of these stitches is the last unwrapped stitch, and this is the most fail-safe way that I've found to do it. So I look at the very end heel stitch and I identify the ridge that's kind of associated with that final stitch, and it's quite nice and easy to show you here because the ridge that goes with that stitch is the one that's grey and green. So that ridge was wrapped there. This next garter stitch ridge above, you see how it kind of points to that second stitch. The first full green ridge points to that second stitch, so that one's been wrapped and turned. The third ridge along here is kind of pointing to and associated with the third stitch, so that one's been wrapped and turned. Every time it's a whole ridge that has got more knitted fabric above it, there should be a wrapped and turned stitch at the end of it. So the ridge that's just below my needles then is the fourth one, and that means it's this fourth stitch here that needs a wrap and turn. So you can work up from the bottom, matching the ridges to the wrapped stitches until you come to the ridge just below your needles, and that one should point at the last unwrapped stitch. If I pull it down a bit there. 1, 2, 3, those are all wrapped. And then that fourth ridge here, it doesn't carry on to that third stitch, it stops. So that fourth stitch is the last unwrapped stitch. So I'll knit along to it and add the wrap and turn. There we go, we've got to it now. There, you can see the ridge. There's no wrap at the bottom of it, but I'm showing you a different way of working that out because I do get that the wraps and the garter stitch ridges do look a little bit similar. Turn it around. There we go, and you can see that each of those 4 stitches has a wrap. I'll show you how it looks on the right side row as well. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the right side row. Just get my cable out of the way. Okay. We're coming towards the end of this right side row, and again we're going to work out which ridge is associated with which wrap and turn. Now this very final heel stitch doesn't have a ridge because it was the first row when we did the first knit. So that doesn't have a ridge, but this next stitch, the first green one, is associated with this ridge here. Can you see how the ridge goes all the way up to the base of that second stitch? Okay. Second ridge goes to the base of that third stitch. The third ridge goes to the base of that fourth stitch. You can see the ridge there, and you can actually see there's kind of the garter stitch ridge and the wrap on that fourth stitch along. So that one has been wrapped, and now here we've got a ridge sitting just at the very base of the needles, and it stops here on the 5th stitch. So that 5th stitch is unwrapped, and that's the one we're going to be doing the wrap and turn on. I've now just completed the shortest row on the wrong side. We've done the wrap and turn, and we're now ready to work back, and we've now finished the section where the rows get shorter and shorter, and we're about to start working the section where the rows get longer and longer. So the first job to do is on that first right side row, you're going to knit the same number of stitches as you knitted on the wrong side row. Oops. Your pattern will tell you how many stitches to work. So because you're knitting the same number of stitches this time, you're knitting that last unwrapped stitch. That's the one that you would have been wrapping if you were continuing to get shorter. We've knitted the last unwrapped stitch, and we've now got a wrapped stitch here on our left needle tip. We're going to knit that wrapped stitch. And we're now going to add a second wrap to the next stitch on the needle. So adding a second wrap to the next stitch is exactly the same as any other wrap and turn. Bring the yarn to the opposite side of the work, slip the next stitch, take the yarn back and slip the stitch back. And now we turn, ready to work in the other direction, and bring the yarn back between the needles again. And you can see now that this stitch has 1, 2 wraps around the base of it. So it's a double wrapped stitch. And we're now going to work back in the other direction on the wrong side row, and we're going to knit up to the first wrapped stitch. Here's our last unwrapped stitch with the garter ridge at the base of it. And here's our first wrapped stitch, and we're going to knit that. And now we're going to add a second wrap to the next stitch on the left needles. Bring the yarn to the front, slip the stitch, take the yarn back, slip the stitch back, and then turn the work. Okay, and we're now going to take the yarn back ready to knit again. And our job now for the rest of the heel, we've done the little shortest rows section. For the rest of the heel, what we're going to be doing is we're going to knit across until we come to the double wrapped stitch. The double wrapped stitch is much easier to spot than just the single wrap stitches before, because it's got 2 wraps. There's generally a bigger gap between the double wrap stitch, which is this one here, and its neighbours. So these ones here have a single wrap. This one is double wrapped. So we're going to knit along, knit the double wrap stitch, and we're then going to add a second wrap to the next stitch. So we've knitted the last unwrapped stitch. Here's our double wrap stitch. We're going to knit the double wrap stitch, and then we're going to add the second wrap to the next stitch. Just using the wrap and turn technique, exactly as you have done throughout this process. And you'll see that you're now working gradually longer rows each time. And you should start to get a little flap section here, which starts to look a little bit more like a heel. I've worked a few more rows and you're starting to really see this heel shape forming now. Down the corner are all the wrap and turn stitches, and you can see the wraps and the garter ridges all kind of meld into the same texture, so there's no need to try to work the wraps with the stitches. And we're going to carry on doing this, knitting across, knitting the double wrap stitch and making the next double wrap stitch until we've worked the final wrong side row. I'm on the last wrong side row, and you can see here I've just added the double wrap to the last heel stitch. You can see it's got 2 lots of dark green around the base of it, and now we're going to knit along until we get to the double wrap stitch. Okay, this is the double wrap stitch, so I'm just knitting that, and then we're going to add a wrap to that first heel stitch. Remember, that first heel stitch might be a little bit loose because it's just got the tail of the yarn attached to it. You can tighten it up, but it'll probably just loosen again, so don't worry too much about it. And now we're going to wrap and turn, but we're not going to return the stitch to this left needle. So we're going to bring the yarn to the front, slip the stitch, take the yarn to the back, and then, as I say, we're not going to slip it back onto this left needle, we're just going to leave it there. So here is our completed heel. Obviously on your actual sock it will be worked on more stitches with more rows and finer yarn, but in the double knit you can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. And the stitches at each end both have their double wraps. I'm now going to break off this contrast yarn and show you how to start working in the round again. I've slipped the last few instep stitches to my right needle tip because I find that I get less of a problem of tension between the stitches if I always have some stitches on my left needle, but you can just pick up the free needle tip and start working. So I'm back to using my main yarn and I'm going to knit across the heel stitches. I've now knitted right the way across my heel stitches, and so I'm on magic loop. I'm going to pull the cable through so that the instep stitches go onto the needle tip. Obviously if you're working on double points you'll just keep going round, and I like to use the travelling magic loop, so as before I'm going to just move a few of those heel stitches onto the right needle tip. But you can just do classic magic loop and just use the empty needle tip to start working across the instep, that's fine. And you're just going to knit across the instep. I always pay a little bit of attention to those first couple of stitches and just make sure they're as snugged up as they can be so that you don't end up with a little hole at the corner there. That's looking good, so now I'm just going to knit across the instep stitches. And here I am coming back to the beginning of the heel section again. Now your pattern may have a partial round as you start working in the round again. that will simply be to take account of the fact that you worked your heel over more than half of the stitches, and you work a partial round so that you can then pop a new marker in, and you should find then that your stitches are divided evenly between the top and the bottom so that you're ready to work your heel in the right place. I'm going to work a few more rounds on this now, and then I'm going to show you how to deal with this gappy bit that we've got here. That's completely normal. It's just because of the tails of the yarn, the stitches have loosened themselves, and I'm going to show you how to weave them in and neaten it up in just a second. I've knitted on round the foot a little bit on my mini sock, and so I'm now going to show you how to weave in the end to tidy up this corner where it's all a bit loose. And I'm going to start by weaving in the tail from the beginning of the heel stitches. So I'm just going to tug on it slightly to just tighten up those stitches, and then I'm going to thread the end onto my tapestry needle. And turn my heel. Happy with how it looks from the front, those stitches. The stitches along the top there are a good size now, so I'm going to turn the work inside out. Oops. Turn the work inside out. I'm happy with the tension of those stitches, and I'm just going to weave the end in up and down along this garter ridge, or along these pearl bumps, going up and down the green ones each time, and that's going to allow that to stay really nice and snug on the inside. There we go, that should be enough. So I'll take that along there. Again, just look on the other side and make sure that the stitches are all the right size. I think they are. Where it's still loose here, that's from this other end, from the end of the heel. And so, given that I'm happy with it, I give it a little bit of a stretch to make sure that the fabric's going to be elastic, and then I'm going to go back in the other direction just for a few stitches, just to lock that end in. There we go. And then I'll pull it through and trim the end, and as I always do, I'm just going to leave a little tab of yarn there, because that little tab stops the end from flicking through to the right side of the work. Now I'm going to do the same with the other end. This was the end from the wrap and turn, and I'm just going to bring the yarn over that final stitch to make that final wrap. So I'm going to sew the end in, pop it on my tapestry needle, and I'm just going to take the end over that last stitch to mimic the wrap and turn. You see how that makes the nice bump on the end there. And now I'm going to come to the wrong side and tidy it up. So there is a little bit of a hole here still, so we're going to see if we can just cinch that in a bit. So here's our end, here's the hole, and in order to tidy that up, we're just going to take the yarn skimming through the stitches around the edge of that hole. I'm just taking a few strands of each of the stitches so that we want the green yarn to stay very much on the wrong side of the work. We don't want that green yarn peeking through at that corner. So I'm just skimming through a couple of plies from each of those, and now that's just tightened in and tightened it up, and then I'm going to bring the yarn and weave it in along the other side of the heel. So the first end's on this side and the second end is going in on this side. Up and down along those bumps, always making sure that it's staying at kind of the wrong side of the work and it's not peeking through on the right. You shouldn't be able to see the needle there particularly. Oops. And then pull it through. And if you look on the right side now, that hole at the corner has completely disappeared. And that completes our heel. It's tidied up all of the ends nice and neatly, and we're ready to continue knitting the foot of the sock. I do hope you found that helpful and are now all set to work a garter stitch short row heel on your next sock project. We're able to keep all of our tutorial videos free from adverts thanks to the amazing support of our fantastic customers. If you'd like to find out more about confident knitting, you can click the link up top here to take you over to our website where you can purchase the book. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel with the button on the bottom right hand corner, and that will make sure that you don't miss our next video tutorial. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye bye.